You might now ask yourself, well, what do the drummer and our today's topic have in common? Well, that's a damn good question, and if you know the answer, let us know. I'm just kidding. We learned that it's all about the perfect synchronization of teams, and this is why we're speaking today and share our experience. My name is Adrian, and I work for Mercedes-Benz Tech Innovation, dealing with software development since 2008, or agile software development. We developed Car.OS, for example, and so on. And currently, I'm working on a big-scale project which is dealing with the over-the-air update for the next Mercedes-Benz Tech Innovation. And also as Ambition, we are a subsidiary of Mercedes-Benz and collaborate also with those colleagues.
Cool. Thank you so much, Adrian. My name is Christoph Schmiedinger, and I'm a consultant and had the opportunity over the last few years to kind of support major transformation efforts in the automotive industry. And that's where also we got to know. And as we are quite for a long time in the agile community and domain, we have been in exchange over the past years from time to time. And today's talk will be about team slicing or team structures. And there's already at the very beginning of our talk some kind of caution. We won't talk too much about frameworks or comparing frameworks at all. We are tried to kind of compile all the experiences we had in the past years and to give you that as our knowledge transfer.
Exactly. So, if you have the luxury to have enough time, then there's just one easy rule you can follow: don't scale. But typically, it's not the point. So you have to consider that if you scale, you also scale your problems, and therefore you have to do your homework and answer some complicated questions. As you can see, we learned that we have problems, and in our context, it's bigger than just one person can do it. So if we're talking about the development, we're talking about from backend till the car, so inside the car, and it's just too big and you have to scale.
Yes, right. But before we dive into the team structures or team slicing, we want to give you the hint of get the basics right. Yeah? Because if you don't have this foundation, then it doesn't make sense to talk about the proper team slicing. So you have to really make sure that the basics are right. Yeah? And now you might ask, what are the basics? And we came basically to four things. Yeah? The first one is about focused teams. Yeah? So that the team member works only for one team, yeah? And not for a multitude of teams, because you all know those circumstances where you lose a lot of effort to an overhead in planning. Yeah? There's a lot of waste in terms of context switching. Yeah? So it's really key to have focused teams. Yeah? The second thing is about the proper agile way of working. Yeah? So don't make too many compromises in your working model. Yeah? For example, skipping regularly the retrospectives, conducting reviews without any external user involved. Yeah? Because this will as well have negative long-term effects, yeah? No matter how your teams are sliced. Yeah? So it's key to have that in mind. Yeah? The next one is sound engineering practices, such as clean code, heavy test automation, because in a scaled environment, and when you're working with multiple partners, as we already heard in some of the talks, yeah, you have to make sure that the teams, they interfere each other anyway, that you detect and identify those interferences and do have a stable and working system available at all times. Yeah? And last but not least, we had this also already in a lot of talks. Yeah? We do need genuine partnerships with our vendors, yeah? Because especially in the SDV area, you work with suppliers, with partners, with a multitude of external parties, and they have to be in kind of an integrated model, like we've heard in the talk from Ambition, because otherwise there is a disconnect. Yeah? We often see setups where the external suppliers cannot join the planning sessions, they are denied access to the backlogs, they miss transparency, and that's not working at all. Yeah? This is kind of very toxic. Yeah? And if you get the basics right, then you can get to the team slicing, which is as well difficult, of course. Yeah? But what we were thinking of is how to slice teams, and we want to talk today about 5 questions that we believe you have to consider. And there might be even more, yeah? But at least we figured, or we thought, those 5 are the key ones. Yeah? And we want to use the metaphor of an iceberg for those 5 questions. So on an iceberg at the top, there is the visible layer. Yeah? So we give you questions that are kind of obvious, yeah? That you might already know. But we also want to go below the surface, so deep into the sea, where is the invisible layer of an iceberg. So we do have questions, I think, brought with us that are not that obvious, yeah? That you don't might glance at the very first sight. Yeah? And we want to start from the top and move our way actually down. And Adrian, you will start with the most obvious one. Yeah?
Exactly. So the first question is, do we go for component teams or feature teams? From my point of view, this is one of the oldest questions, but it's still really, really complicated, and there is no easy answer. You have to find your own way, because you will read, okay, go for this, but it's not that easy. So let's have a closer look at what we learned and what are the advantages and disadvantages in those approaches. We saw that component teams are compared to a yard. So you have some clear boundaries, you have people which take care after the trees, some other take care for some flowers, and also some other take care or have an eye on the weed which is growing. So you have clear structures and clear responsibilities, and everything is growing well. But for sure, you have to synchronize those different parts to make sure that the feature or something which is really valuable is coming out. So this makes it really time-consuming and also sometimes complicated, because we know that the development is not finished when we say it's finished, so it's finished when it's finished. This is for regarding the component teams. And if we talk regarding feature teams, this was for a long time the solution we talked about. So just put the right people in one team and they will sit together and they will solve the problem. But now, so we face that if we talk about a complex and big thing, and if we have a lot of different areas, we're talking about back-end development, a lot of frameworks you have to know, and we're talking about the car side, we're talking about structures, and also you have different developing languages, then we saw that it makes really complicated to have those people in one team. Because you have just one domain expert in one team, for example, and then you lose the ability to spar your ideas, which is really important. So feature teams are great, but you have to consider that the context they are facing should be big enough to handle, but not too big. And just keep in mind, so keep the teams while we're talking about staffing cross-functional, but avoid cognitive overload. And we saw this in the teams. We tried a lot of things. And if you say that it is a good idea to have all frameworks in one team, this could lead to the point that people say, okay, it's just too much.
Right, yeah. And I will continue with, we're still on the top of the iceberg, so still are with obvious questions. So the second question is, okay, we discussed now the topic of how to slice teams or in which primary dimension. The second one is then above the teams, yeah? Which levels of steering do we need? Yeah? And to make sure that all of the teams are going into a joint direction. Yeah? And what we came up with is that you should definitely go for a lean management and scaling approach. And we do know that almost all of the industry are striving towards safe, but we encourage you to actually go for a leaner approach. Yeah? And it's kind of interesting that it's similar to what was presented from Ambition, yeah? But we will get to that in a second. Yeah? Because we do believe that every company anyway adds their specific topics and environments. Yeah? And when you do have a comprehensive framework and then add your own aspects to it, then you make it even more clumsy. Yeah? So we figured out that usually we try to start very lean, yeah, with the good old practices from Scrum of Scrums. Yeah? So we kind of appoint the chief product owner, we nominate the chief Scrum Master, and we make sure that those colleagues are then working with their teams. teams, the team of the product owners, the team of the Scrum Masters, and the dev team should also talk to each other. This makes totally sense from a dependency point of view. And we always start with that, and then we try to add some of the things we've learned over the past years. For example, that it is quite good to have one colleague that is mainly responsible for the technology. In SAFe, this might be the system architect. For another tier 1 supplier, we called that lead engineer. But it does make sense. And what was also kind of helpful was the quarterly planning. Although we not every time conducted the whole 2-day effort that is described in SAFe. And we believe that's mainly it. Using Scrum or Scrums, having this fractal organization, which you can scale almost indefinitely, and then add some people that are responsible for technology and quarterly plannings. On portfolio level, and this is where we use the metaphor not of the yarn, of the garden, of the single gardens, but more from an urban planning view, you have to make sure at portfolio level that you really look at features. Because the features are those, what Adrian already said, those are the valuable items that bring value to clients, to users. And that's why it's really key that at least on the portfolio level, so above the teams, you focus on features in order to then orchestrate that they multiple teams deliver together a feature. Those were the two obvious ones, and now we are going already a little bit deeper.
Right, now we are a little bit deeper and between the visible and the invisible part. And what we learned is there is no right or wrong. And we see that you have to be clear on how you make your decisions inside a big project. So we learned that it is good to have just a simple model like this and to communicate who's in charge to take which decision. So, for example, we have top-down and bottom-up approaches, and we have central and decentralized. And we learned that, for example, for some bigger architecture discussions, it's a good idea to use a bottom-up approach and use a decentralized and use requests for comments to have a community to talk about those things and at the end take the decision. But some other things are or should be done top-down and centralized. But it's important that you are clear which decisions are made by whom, because otherwise it's really difficult to follow those structure.
Right. So we are now moving more below the surface, and below the surface it's actually very human, because the system is made up of people, and therefore it comes with all its known shortcomings. So of course, when you do have a multiple bunch of teams, it's really key to kind of bring them all together, or that they pool all together towards the project goals, towards the project objectives. And while it's already an old hat, having a dedicated role or dedicated colleague on team level that makes sure that the team is performing, we do recommend that you do have those roles also on a scaled level. So we do recommend using, for example, an Agile coach that is then responsible for making the team of teams performant, because this is as well a key, because the best perfect or the world best team structure means nothing if the teams are not collaborating with each other. And you have the same kind of phases also in a team of teams. So we do definitely recommend that you also pay attention on performance in the scaled environment. Yes.
Okay, and now the last one. Be honest to yourself. If you think about the last discussion you had regarding slicing the teams, did you ask all people or some more people, or did you just talk to the people you know very well? This is something you have to consider. So we learned that having a clear communication and involvement strategy helps really to slice and afterwards to change it. Because we believe that trust is more important than performance. And you have to build up a network of trust, and with this network of trust, you can have those changes done great.
Yeah. So, to sum up, we had those 5 questions here, and as we said, the very first 2 ones are the rather obvious ones. Yeah? Do we go more for component or feature teams? Of course, it depends. Yeah? I think what we also did, I'm not sure whether we mentioned this already, to dynamically add feature teams. Yeah? Kind of, okay, if we do have a complex item at hand, then we can go for creating temporary teams that are working for 6 to 9 months, whatever time is needed. Because that's key, that we are kind of agile in ourselves, to be adaptable to that. Yeah? The second one is, how do we steer team of teams? There we recommended this more Scrum at scale approach, using the Scrum of Scrums and adding some elements from SAFe. And the third one was this kind of how much decentralization, how much autonomy is needed. And Adrian, you mentioned that it's even more important that you know which decisions to take where, than just going for everything like decentralized and autonomy. So, and the 2 at the bottom, the 4th and the 5th one, are more the people-related questions. And if you
Go ahead.
What you want to add something?
No. Go ahead.
The 5 questions, I think it's important that you don't ask those questions yourself only once. Yeah? You have to adopt an inspect and adapt approach, and ask yourselves repeatedly those questions. And you may ask yourself, how can I know, or how do I see if we are making progress, or if the setup gets even worse? And we had in our very last project, we had kind of metrics, simple metrics like number of dependencies, number of escalations over a certain amount of time, and there we try to really decrease it. Yeah? And to decrease it, and then we are on the right track. Yeah? If we don't compromise any other things like quality and so on. Yeah? And you have to allow fluidity. So in many organizations, I've seen that once the team structure is kind of sketched on paper, then it's fixed, and we never touch it. And I think that's not good, because only when the rubber hits the road, you really see what's working and what not. And that means regularly reflecting on the team setup, which also doesn't mean that you kind of reshape the teams every 2 weeks, because this also doesn't make sense, and it does not improve performance. And exceptions prove the rule. Yeah? I think that's what we also figured out. Like those dynamic feature teams, I think it's really key that you kind of give yourself the freedom to do something that is needed for being successful, although it might be not in the initial paper. Yeah? And to close the whole topic of our team structure talk, let's go back to the basics. We saw that it's really helpful to have a regular retrospective, for example, every 6 months, about how's the team structure? Is it good? Do we have to change something? And it is even more important than not just scheduling this appointment, but rather to work on action items that can be followed up, that triggers change. Yeah? So you really, really improve your setup over time. Yes. Do you want to add something?
No.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Then we are open for questions. Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, right. We've got a lot of time for questions now, and I think there will be some. Yeah, Stefan. No, come forward to the microphone, otherwise people won't hear you. Thanks.
Slicing team is always nice if you have internal developers, but what do you do if you have external teams to integrate? Do you have that challenge too?
Yeah, I know the question, and we have this also. From my point of view, it's a good idea to first start and integrate with a closer collaboration model, and to get to know what is the capability of the people, just for the start, and then together define what are things you can slice out. I think this is the best way, but I know also there are regulations and you have to write what is the artifact you have to deliver. But at the end, we learned that it is better first to work together and then together slice the teams.
Isn't compliance a pain there because German law does not allow that?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Okay. Thanks.
Point.
Okay, so there's another question. Yes, please.
Good morning, good morning, everybody. My name is Muriel de Zager from Toyota. I think all what you say is correct. I have just a question about documentation. You see, when you have big teams and slicing and all what you mentioned, all these people often move from one position to another, from one topic to another. But how to keep the know-how, how to document what is done? That was not addressed, but I think it's also very critical.
Yes, sure.
I think my first idea was this topic of definition of done. I think it's even more important in a kind of a regulated environment, because you do have to make sure that every backlog item, every artifact is properly tested, properly traced, properly documented. Yeah? So I would put a strong emphasis on definition of done. But I might wonder what you...
Yes, exactly. So I can just add that it is important to have one, and I also think this was also in the room today, one wiki or confluence, one common ground where people can found those informations. So I think this is really important. So one thing is to say, okay, we have it in the definition of done, but also important to have one area where people can find this information. Yeah.
Yes, next question. Rosemary.
Hi.
Yes, so it's Rosemary again from Continental. So my question is, you proposed Scrum of Scrum for scaling. Did you evaluate other frameworks for scaling? How does Scrum of Scrum really connect to that statement of your portfolio level connection, right? I mean, the significance in the portfolio level. So what are your views on that?
I can start.
Yeah.
So we tried a lot of frameworks. So we started in 2008 with Agile development, and the frameworks were not really developed or not very good to use. And then we used a lot of frameworks. And the problem is that from my point of view, we can not only use just one framework, and that's the point here. So we have areas, and we work also together with Ambition, for example, and they have their way of working, and then we have some parts in the back end which use SAFe, and then we have some parts which use less. At the end, it's how you synchronize those different parts. And so if you look on a big company, so I'm not really believe that you will find one perfect framework, but you have to be clear what are the boundaries and how you can synchronize those different areas. And things we use also, for example, from SAFe is the PI planning, because I think it's helpful, independent, which framework you go for, because you synchronize those activities.
Yeah, I agree. I think on the portfolio level, we tend to use some stuff from SAFe, of course, because there is a lot available. Because there it's kind of in Scrum at scale, it's a bit fluffy. Yeah? I mean, this is kind of propagating. Yeah? They just say, okay, all the CPOs have to align. Yeah. And kind of you are then already at the portfolio level, yeah? Or at least a layer above. Yeah? And this is quite good described in SAFe, you can take elements. But I think the key is start lean, yeah? Because you will anyway add more stuff. Yeah? And we are kind of a bit afraid of starting already with a lot and then doing even more. Yeah?
Thank you.
So we've got two more questions, 1 and 2. Right.
My question is, when you slice teams, what is the preferred size of a team for you? The context is that in the early times we tried to go for teams with, let's say, 5 developers, so the optimal number. But then we learned that staffing all these teams of Scrum Masters and POs would not be possible due to the planned roles. So currently we are on 11 in total.
So we have the same idea. We use typically team sizes of 10 people. This is our typical approach. Because if it's too small, then you have the problem I mentioned, that you have those different areas, and it's really difficult to get something out of the teams.
All right.
Hi, I'm Ansgar Kuhlmann from DSpace.
Hi.
And it's still like some patterns for slicing teams. Have you also tried that there's a self-selection mechanism that people choose with other people to work with?
Yeah, this is something we have also. We have this in place. And what we do is, if people would like to do something new, there are some marketplaces, and people can choose by their own. And we know, okay, this is the business requirement, and currently we're searching in these teams for some people. And then there are some team presentations, and people which want to change the teams can participate and then take the decision in which team they would like to go for the next decades, years, I don't know, something like this.
And what we can add, because it's in the backup slides, but we skipped it finally, we are working strongly with those team topologies. Yeah? Although we also say, okay, that's not like the sacred where all is defined, but we educating people on different modes of a team, like those featured teams, which are more the stream-aligned teams, those platform teams, enabling teams, and there are even interaction mode, no? As a service, collaborating. We try to educate people because then for them it's easier in those marketplaces to kind of think of, okay, now we found a bunch of guys to deliver that stuff. Yeah? How do we want to work actually, yeah? Together with others? Yeah? So that's also another kind of, it's not a framework, team topologies, but at least a meta model, I would call it, that we heavily use. Yeah?